check. Yeah, it's time. It's time to check in with reality. Thank you for joining us. We have got some stories today. Some of these will hit close to home. Some of these you won't believe. For example, there is an ongoing military coup. If you've been watching the Yaron Brook show, he mentioned this. A military coup. A country has thrown out its ruler. Others have taken over in Niger, or Niger, as some folks like to say. And this is just last week. This is current events. And it's interesting because we're not talking about Nigeria now. We're talking about that country to the north. Yeah. Tons of resources, an amazing future ahead of them, and the place is a total nightmare. In fact, as countries that still have slavery, Niger, I think, is at the top of the list with as many as 8% of the population. So a strange side effect of this was a French colony, a colonized nation in Africa. And they have been trying to throw out the French and adopting Russia as their cultural ideal, as the folks they want to come help them. I want to know what the guys think and then the ladies think of this, but also after school, you all remember after school specials, after school programs, sports. How about this? After school Satan clubs.
Yep.
Satanic clubs are increasing in popularity. There's even been a satanic temple praised by some objectivists as a kind of humanist creed, which stands for example, free speech. So we're going to talk about what we think of that. But our lead story, again, I'm going to say it, you're not going to believe it, but believe it. An autistic, this is in the headlines, this is not some fringe story. An autistic girl, 16 years old, has been arrested for comparing a police officer to her Nana, her grandmother. She reminded her of her grandmother, who happens to be a lesbian. The girl, 16-year-old girl says, yeah, you remind me of my grandmother. Yeah, she's a lesbian. Okay, maybe a little rude. Well, get this, the girl was arrested. We're talking about the UK here. You United States folks are thinking, wait a minute, First Amendment. They don't have a First Amendment. This girl was arrested for a homophobic public offense. The police in the UK are increasingly heavy-handed and are PC. Folks might not know what PC means anymore in the age of woke. We used to call woke politically correct in a ridiculous way. So I want to ask the panel, and we are talking today to Alejandro is in the house, Michael is in the house, Amy Nacer is in my studio. So what do we think of this 16-year-old? The fact that she's autistic just kind of drives home that she wasn't even necessarily fully in control of what she was saying. I think that's almost irrelevant. 16-year-old girl arrested for saying to a police officer, and I've seen the video, police officer has a look that might have made somebody naive say this. You remind me of my Nana, who's a lesbian. Arrested. What do we think of that? Who shall I call out first? Does somebody want to go first?
Oh, I'll go first. I thought you said Alejandro was first. My fault. The main thing here, aside from the fact that you hear me okay?
Yes. Sound
okay.
Good.
Aside from the fact that the girl's autistic, the fact that they have this law about homosexual or homophobic comments, so I can't remember the exact name of it, homophobic comment disturbances or some crazy thing.
It's the homophobic public offense order.
Yeah, I mean, that's like taken straight out of Orwell. That to me is the starting point of this whole thing. That's absolutely ridiculous that they have the authority to do such a thing. But then on top of that, the way that these police allegedly behaved, if it's indeed true, staring at the girl and manhandling her and whatnot. First of all, she's 16. You're talking about a 16-year-old girl. And then on top of it, it turns out she's autistic. Like, it's just so absurd. And it never ceases to amaze me how ridiculous people in authority can act, especially in what are called civilized countries or democratic countries. It doesn't matter, I guess, what kind of country you're in. When you give people authority, ultimately somebody's going to abuse it. And I think that's what we see here.
Alejandro, what do you think?
No,
I'm very cautious to have an opinion on this kind of things, especially when they are developing. And I was reading the Telegraph article, and apparently the police had seen and taken the girl originally, like she was intoxicated, and then they took her to her home. And it was when she was at home where everything happened. And the story sounds a bit bizarre in many senses. I think the principle of homophobic comments being criminalized, I think that's the bad thing. But at the same time, there might be some things that we don't really know about the case, and which may play in favor of the police. Now, my impression on my overall impression of the police in the UK is that they are really both overwhelmed by this kind of stuff, and also really bad at handling, being able to get a standard on how to judge these kind of things. So they either underplay it or they overplay it. They don't have a way in which to handle these things objectively. So it's I wouldn't be surprised that this thing was exaggerated on their part, because these kind of laws are really unobjective, and there is no real way in which how to handle them. In that sense, I would say that in part, police could be as well the victims of these kind of laws.
That's a great point. They are enforcing the law as it is out there. Now, video has been released of the incident. The police are saying that the video that we've all seen, that's only part of the picture, and they've got more body cam video that eventually may be available for folks to see, but don't judge too fast. So Alejandro, it's great that you are determined not to judge this one too fast. The fact that the girl was autistic comes through on the video, because by the time the police are ready to arrest her, she's curled up in a ball in the corner on the floor. She's hitting herself in the head. Some people would say, oh yeah, she's putting on the victim act. No, I think she was. Well, Amy, what do you think?
Yeah, I think I agree with you, Alejandro, that you need to be cautious about what's going on here. From what I understand, from what another news source was, that a family member called, one of her family members called and said that she was out in the middle of a street or on a street or something, intoxicated, doing something that was calling attention to herself. And so they picked her up, took her home. That's when apparently the girl called the woman officer. She compared her to her lesbian Nana. And so then the police officer, this lady, became offended by this, and she mentioned that she was going to arrest her because of this homophobic public offense. And then another officer, a man who is an officer next to the woman officer, agreed. And then by that time, like 7 officers entered this home and took the girl away, kicking and screaming. So I'd like to get down to a little bit more of the cause, the philosophical and psychological root causes of this kind of thing. Because this law ostensibly is trying to help people who are feeling bullied or might be in danger or might be vulnerable. They might be part of the LGBT community. And a lot of people have bought into this idea that that group of individuals is more vulnerable and less capable of thinking things through. They take offense more easily. They are more powerless, and they need to be protected from words, basically. So the question really is do words actually hurt people? And I think we all can agree, no. Sticks and stones maybe break your bones, but words will never hurt me. But where is this coming from? And I dug a little bit deeper and everything. And, you have this idea in psychology called psychological determinism, or determinism in philosophy, that you are powerless to, and you don't have the power to actually make choices in your life and to act. You don't have the power to not take things personally. the lady offer was powerless. She couldn't take, she couldn't not, she had to take things personally when the 16-year-old called her a lesbian. She couldn't think it through. And therefore, she was somehow abused by the girl, which is ridiculous, of course.
Yeah, that's a theme that's come up a lot in these conversations, is that sense of determinism out there, that we are victims of our circumstances, victim of our socioeconomic classes, victims of whatever words somebody throws at us. This keeps coming up when we talk about people like Sam Harris who are pushing this determinism line. We say, well, he's a psychologist and he's got to look at stuff that way, and it's all weird and nobody really believes that. And yet, you're right, Amy, this comes up. And yeah, this poor officer, what else was she expected to do?
So, yeah, I mean, she should have said, I'm not taking this personally. This girl needs some help. I'm glad she is home. And please take better care of her and make sure she stays away from alcohol, whatever it may be. But getting down to, and we'll get this, when we talk about our other topics today, I think this will be a theme that's kind of brought up about thoughts and words are epistemological. They're primarily epistemological. They are not metaphysical. They're not going to hit you in the head. They're not going to break your arm. They're just words. They're sounds coming out of a person's mouth. It's just language. It's just thoughts. And what is more abusive, to insult somebody or to coerce people into not thinking about something and not saying something, to force a person to not be acting on their nature as a human being, as a conceptual human being. When you force a human being to stop using their faculty of reason, that is more abusive. That is what is that should be outlawed.
Excellent. Well, I have something to say about this, but first I've got to say thank you to Roland. Roland Horvath is in with a super chat. Now, at the very beginning of the topic, because our illustrious producer did put up a thumbnail that says, in line with the Florida Don't Say Gay. And yes, we know Governor DeSantis, the law is not called the Don't Say Gay law, but it's an apt name. It's been given anyway. And in the chat, as soon as our illustrious producer put up a thumbnail that says "Don't Say Lesbian," everybody in the chat is saying lesbian, 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 lesbian. In fact, Roland Horvath is in the chat and says, I wanted to say the above as a super chat, but true to form, YouTube wouldn't let me. Now, YouTube is not allowing you to use the word lesbian in a super chat. My immediate reaction to the UK story was, what is wrong with being called, or in this case, just being told you remind somebody of, a lesbian? It's 2023, for Pete's sake. How is that a slur? Much less something that you could be, legislating against. But that's arguing the merits of the case. What needs to be done? Well, we need to argue the merits of this specific case, but there's a bigger problem: the status of free thought, and consequently of free speech, of free expression in Britain. This may seem, y'all might be used to this over across the pond, but the UK needs a First Amendment, and they need it yesterday. The fact that a 16-year-old girl is autistic is almost irrelevant. The fact that the police officer needs to grow a thicker skin is almost irrelevant. But yes, the girl needs to be apologized to and offered compensation, in my opinion. Any more thoughts on this story? Michael, I'll honor.
Yes, actually, you mentioned that after all, they are the police and they're doing they're enforcing the law. And I agree, but only to an extent. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Cool Hand Luke. Anybody seen it?
A long time ago.
Well, there's a scene in Cool Hand Luke where he's in jail and they've got to lock him in basically like a shed. It's a segregation overnight. And the officer, the correctional officer says to him, "I'm just doing my job, Luke." And Luke said to him, "Do you think that makes it okay?" And it just, if you're, I don't know how much leeway people get for enforcing laws if they're enforcing bad laws. To an extent, if a society is basically just and there's some, minor things, I understand that. I just think we should be careful, because that's the same excuse that Eichmann used, at Nuremberg, It's the same or Jerusalem, I mean, my fault. It's the same excuse that they used after My Lai. Well, we're just following orders. And that only goes so far, in my view.
Well, you're right. It has been called the Nuremberg defense.
Was it
And
Nuremberg, or I don't know where it was, either Jerusalem, Nuremberg. I get them confused, but
now, of course, we're not talking about concentration camp guards here, but still, yeah, the idea of arresting this gal for this.
And that's a feature of a society that has laws with different objectives in principle. On the one hand, police are tasked to protect the innocent, and in others, different senses, they are tasked to punish the innocent and protect the guilty. Maybe in this case isn't that obvious, but we have talked in the past about this Just Stop Oil and how they basically stop people from going to the hospital or going back to home. And the police, what they do, instead of removing the Just Stop Oil protesters, they actually protect them. And that's one of the features that you will have when there is contradiction in principle with your original task. Now, to what extent a good policeman should behave upon that, it's a good question, and I'm not sure. I think they should be a bit more vocal about the things that they disagree with, and they should be saying that there are some laws which, by their own nature, they won't be able to enforce them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we talked earlier this week about jury nullification. This would be, and it's not that unusual. There are laws on the books that nobody enforces anymore, certainly here in the United States. It's a little more activist to say, yeah, but this is a law still being enforced and we're going to be lax on it because we don't agree with it. But in this particular case, it seems like there was plenty of room for judgment to take exactly that approach.
Have you seen those ridiculous laws that are still present in the UK? That you cannot walk with a salmon suspiciously, that you cannot be...
We got a bunch in the US. I haven't seen the UK about walking with a salmon, but it could, yeah.
Instead of that's like Monty Python, is what that sounds like.
Except it's all still on the books. Amazing. Well, fortunately, we have the rule of law. We have a working justice system in both the United States and the UK. But if we go far enough south, the situation in Niger, or Niger, although when you say Niger, everybody confuses it with Nigeria, which is even further south. In Niger, just south of the Sahara, in fact, the north end of Niger is essentially Saharan desert. From Time magazine, here's a description of what's going on there. Russia's presence in Africa is hardly new. Ghana, Guinea, Mali are all cases in point where the Soviet Union, led by Russia, is remembered as a potent anti-colonial force. See, we've got the dictator or the proper leader of Niger thrown out, military coup this week. And what's their first thought is we need to get rid of all of the emblems. They're tearing up flags and burning them of the French and French colonialism, which I could almost understand if they were looking for their independence, but they're putting up flags of Russia all over the place. What do we think of this?
Well, it's really sad that they are appealing to the Russians, and I don't know enough about the country, and especially the relationship with the French. My sense is that probably the French didn't do any good over there, but I think they are far away from their independence. And to the extent that there is some problems left from the French, I think they should sort them out in accordance to what the principle of individual rights should give them. And I think in that sense, Russia, appealing to Russia, is the exact opposite, right? If someone is going from, if you think that France did something really bad to you, you should appeal to someone better. And the only explanation that I would explain, the only reason I would tell to myself of why they would be appealing to Russia is that they want either their moral or military support. And that's even bad enough.
Yeah, my understanding is that Putin has broadcasted and kind of infiltrated the media in Africa there, saying, hey, if you need our help, we would like to help your country out because I see that you are all angered by the failed Western countries' colonization, and they have not protected you. And what's happening in Niger is that there's a whole bunch of different Islamic terrorist groups surrounding this particular country. And so they want to have security. They don't feel that the French government has offered enough security. And this Mohamed Bazoum, this deposed president, has offered that. So they are reacting to Putin's call, his offer to help them out. So yeah, my thinking on this is that the likely outcome of this, if Russia actually does help them out, is that Russia will go in, loot them for all of their natural resources, including gold, and keep them as slaves, basically. There was this one gentleman who was interviewed from Niger who was basically saying, you know, we are basically all slaves here. We don't have any rights. I don't know exactly the extent to which they're slaves or if they are forced to work or anything like that, but
well, the last good research that was done showed that 8% of the population are slaves. There's actually still slavery there. Earlier reports suggested 3 to 4%. The latest report is showing 8%. It's 2023, for Christ's sake.
I know that there's been a history of Muslims, of Islamists who promote and actually participate slavery, and they enslave Africans. And so, yeah,
well, that's another fascinating part of the story. The country is 99.3% Muslim. It's 0.4% Christian and a little bit of a few other things. And yet their biggest concern is they are surrounded by 3 different factions of Islamic totalitarianism and terrorism.
Yeah.
And they're this country that is over 99% Muslim is looking for help from the Russians. Well, they certainly don't want to be Russian Orthodox or whatever Vladimir Putin considers himself to be these days. Any other thoughts on this unusual military coup in which seeking their independence would be one thing, but then calling out to Russia as the answer?
Yeah,
Michael, do you have any thoughts on that one?
It reminds me of the Israelites in the Bible going to Samuel and begging for a king. Like, why would you want Russia to have anything to do with you? I don't understand that. And it's clear to me, I mean, they don't want liberty. So what is it that they want? Are the people that are calling for Russia, do they want Russia to come to help them dominate some other faction within their own country? I ultimately don't know, but I love when there was a guy on there and he says, and he starts naming natural resources. And I believe he mentioned uranium, but I'm not positive. Diamonds he mentioned too. And it's just something that whenever I hear someone say we have, because they happen to be in a geographic location where you're situated, it's assumed that the stuff is ours. Like when they talk about our wealth in America, it's just a collectivist premise that's buried within those statements. It never ceases to get my attention. That's all. It's not really relevant to the overall story, or maybe it is, because when you're collectivist, maybe that's how you end up calling for Russia instead of France. You can't imagine not having somebody to lord over you.
Yeah. You want to hear him say, this is a country that is rich in natural resources, and if we can establish private property rights, then we can grow out of the situation that we're in. And unfortunately, that's not what you're hearing. A little more explanation from the Time magazine story, because this is kind of irresistible, and it will lead us into our third topic. They write, the Soviet Union, led by Russia, is remembered as a potent anti-colonial force, seeking to free Africans from European and American capitalist oppression. We forget sometimes what Soviet propaganda was like, and they convinced half of the world that America was just full of ghettos. that it was just a bunch of rich people and then a whole bunch of really poor people. Anyway, they go on. Soviet involvement in Africa was widespread, featuring economic and military assistance for socialist-leaning governments and militias fighting liberation wars. Then and since, Russia has maintained a decades-long diplomatic presence in most African countries. And then get this, disinformation campaigns have boosted Russian influence through anti-colonialist memes that have turned into action in the streets of Chad, Mali, and elsewhere. Now, I don't think they necessarily mean memes on the internet, more in the general sense that Richard Dawkins, for example, uses internet memes, but also postering and propaganda and short and sweet ways of telling them, yeah, Russia they're the anti-colonialists. They're the ones who are going to keep us from being subjugated by both France and countries like the United States. It makes me wonder, is there something that the US or the UK or the Western world could be doing to reach these people and say, look, the fact that you're all Muslim, believe whatever you believe, but you're independent enough to say, well, we don't want to be part of any of the groups that are trying to recruit us or take us over, is a reason to embrace democracy and republicanism, the rule of law. I wish that there was a way that we could do that.
Well, yeah.
Above and beyond conversations like this.
I think at this point, what they're looking for is stability, not freedom. And they are seeing, actually, I think that they're seeing Russia as something that's more attractive to them, because Russia is actively in a war and engaging and has that kind of strongman reputation, along with their Wagner and their military and the paramilitary, whatever it is. So yeah, I think that's what they're looking for.
And one thing we know about Putin is he claims to be the archetype of Western civilization. Again, remember that to the rest of the world, and I don't mean the UK or Europe, but to the Russians and anybody they influence, the United States is not a civilizing influence, it's a corrupting influence. Mm-hmm. Crazy. But yeah, this idea that Russian memes, and again, they're not just talking about cute pictures on the internet, but that Russian memes are telling Afrikaners, look, we are the force that can stop the imperialism, that can stop the colonialism.
And the terrorism.
We can save you. And so unless we have anything else to say about Niger, we go with the memes to topic number 3, after school clubs. After school Satan clubs are increasing in popularity.
Everybody.
And
here you go, Michael. Here.
Yeah, our show organizer wrote, I have even seen the Satanic Temple praised by some objectivists as a kind of humanist creed which stands for free speech. Now, I use the term intentionally Halloween humanists in the same way that some people talk about Christmas Catholics, people who are Christian but only ever go to church on holidays. These Halloween humanists here, they actually do have, I can say why who was it, Morgan, who wrote that, said, yeah, I've seen this in the objectivist community. What do we think about this one? And Amy, I know you've got a lot to say. Maybe you want to be the climax of this conversation, or maybe you want to kick it off for us. What do you think?
Oh, no, go ahead. I'd like to hear what Michael and Alejandro.
I see a big smile on Alejandro's face. Do you have something that's coming to mind for you there?
Not really, to be honest. When Morgan sent the story to us, and I really didn't have anything to say. Maybe I could say that the story of Lucifer is really interesting. It's one of the fallen angel and the person who wants to defy God. And I think the whole idea of defying the gods is really poetic and nice. I prefer the Greek story of Bellerophon. I think that's more humanistic. But if Satanism has to some extent that idea of wanting to defy the gods, trying to not only emanate them, but emulate them, but being better than them. That's really nice. My impression is that they're not like that. They're a bit more like scoundrels or like funny guys, but I don't know, what do you have to say about that?
Well, thank you for that. Now we've got a super chat. I've got to give a huge shout out to Dr. Ribbons. Megan Ribbons is in with a super chat. And in relation to the previous story, she says, I like how Michael asks what the positive aspirations of Niger's people are. With that compliment in mind, let me jump to you, Michael. Do you have any thoughts about the Satan clubs or the Satanic Temple and becoming popular? People are saying.
I actually do. In a few days, I'm actually going to be interviewing on my podcast a representative from the Satanic Temple After School Club.
Whoa!
It's something I'm really looking forward to doing. If you actually look at their mission statement and the things that they actually stand for, they say that they're for empathy and compassion based on reason. They say that they teach science in accordance with be able to back up your scientific beliefs. And the after school programs that they have teach about animals. They specify bats. They actually have nothing to do with the biblical Satan. They talk about that Satan is a mythological entity. That said, so the title of the Satan Club, it reminds me a little bit, and let me stress a little bit, of in the introduction to The Virtue of Selfishness, Ayn Rand says, when she says that she's asked why she uses virtue of selfishness, and she says, for the same reason that makes you afraid of it. And I think it's a similar dynamic that when you if they were just to call themselves the After School Rational Club or the After School Empathy Club, we wouldn't be talking about them, and neither would anybody else. But the fact that they call themselves the After School Satanic Club, or some such variation of that, gets them a lot of attention, and that, I think, can be a good thing. And also, it should be noted that they only do these after school things because they're opposed to religions in schools, period. So what they do is, if a school is going to implement other after school religious programs, then they come and say, okay, well, if you can do it, then so can we. And so they're fighting for that. They also fight for pro-choice as relates to abortion. The concept of Satan and calling it the Satanic Temple, though, I can't get over it as a little bit hokey. Like what that's going to bring up in people's minds. In the case of Rand, she referred to a real concept and a real phenomenon, even though it's controversial. Satan is a non-existent entity. It's make-believe. And I just can't see how you expect to be taken seriously once you open up calling yourself that. I'm open to have my mind changed, but that's my initial perception of them.
Excellent. I've got to go back a step. I almost missed a super chat from Jeff Bannister. Thank you very much for your contribution. Folks, if you want to support the Ayn Rand Center UK, you know what to do, but I'm going to tell you anyway. There's a link at the top of the chat. That's where you can become a member. You can become part of things you might not even know about, such as activities going on tomorrow that are open only to certain tiers of membership. Go to AynRandCenter.co.uk, click Become a Member, or just click that link in the chat. Also, your super chats, any funds that you put in, make your comments stand out, and you certainly deserve that. But also, all of those funds go to support the Ayn Rand Center UK, and Jeff Bannister is in with funds supporting the Ayn Rand Center UK and says, do you consider that free speech is absolute? My short answer is going to be yes, but there's a context for that. Trump just today was told that it is not by an American judge. I don't like Trump, but this is wrong, no? And the answer is free speech is an absolute, but there's a point at which it goes beyond speech. When it becomes, for example, incitement to violence or slander and libel that causes harm to another individual. So there is a context for it. If you want to say that means it's not an absolute, I don't think that's the right way to look at it. But
yeah, I think that like yelling fire in a crowded theater, obviously, some kind of you're creating some sort of imminent situation of danger.
Right.
But with the law, I believe, and I may be wrong, if you want to, as a defendant, if you want to have a fair trial, you want to not just put all the facts out, all these discoveries and all of these things that were So in other words, it's usually in a defendant's self-interest to not say anything in the media. And this might be the case with Trump, but I believe that Trump, being who he is and how he is, thinks to himself, well, whatever I say is golden to all of my fans. No matter what happens, I'm going to be out in the middle of the street shooting people down. I'll still be loved. So yeah, I don't think it's inappropriate in a judicial context to keep discoveries and facts of a case closed and to where you can't talk about it in the media.
And what is the meaning of absolutes? Like when we talk about the absolute king, we don't say, the king of all the world and all the universe. We talk about the king that was king in just a specific time in a specific territory. I think in that context, we speak about free speech. Free speech, the context of free speech is the context of people having the right for their life. And that's that's a context where you have the right for free speech. And if using whatever you say to violate the rights of others, and that means starting the use of force to some extent to violate those rights, then you don't have that right, because you don't have the right to violate the lives of other people. That's a context. And if, for instance, I don't have the details of Trump or anything that has been done. I haven't followed the news, but if, for instance, what he said was in reality to stage a coup or to start a violent process, that's not in the context of free speech, not because he said something, but because he initiated or started a very specific process that started the violation of certain rights.
Yeah, and it's a principle that goes throughout objectivism, contextual absolutism. You can say we believe property rights are an absolute. Doesn't mean you can do whatever you want with your property if that includes harming other people. We can say that certainty is an absolute. Doesn't mean that you're omniscient, that you can't make mistakes even though you're certain. So yes, as a free speech is an absolute within its context. Absolutely. And I don't think that Trump appreciates that, understands that, or even wants to respect that fact. Best I can say. Just best I can say.
Yeah.
Can I,
Yes.
I chime in? Alejandro asked, well, what is absolutism? I think I would ask, well, what is free speech? And I think understood properly, yes, it is absolute, but is it free speech for me to, like, one of the things Trump's lawyer said on the new, or in an article I read, was all he did was ask people to do things. That's okay. Well, I went to prison for asking people to do things, because I asked them to do something illegal that was going to violate someone's rights. That's not free speech. Free speech is expressing your ideas, your opinions, saying what's on your mind, not trying to get other people to perform illegal acts for you, not threatening people on the internet. Like when he says, if you come after me, I'm coming after you. That's a threat. That's not freedom of speech. Mm-hmm. So I think that both terms need to be clarified. What is absolutism and what is free speech? And I think if once you understand the context and once you understand what free speech is, then yes, it is absolute. Very
good. So what do we think, Amy? Because I know you've got something to say about this. I think that Michael's right, and a couple people in the chat have echoed that sense of, well, they're a little wacky. They're a little out there.
Yeah, they are very. I mean, when I first saw it, I first heard about them maybe 10 years ago, and they're kind of geeky, kind of dorky, they're nerdy. They're kind of goth in that way. And my understanding at first was, this, if it wasn't for the fact that many Christians, unfortunately, believe that there is some sort of devil archangel that fell from the heavens and now resides in a place called hell that actually exists. This could have been, the temple of Zeus or the Athenian temple or some other thing like that. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's kind of it's a publicity stunt in a lot of ways. But what they've actually done with their organization, I think, is admirable in a lot of ways. They have basically figured out how to come up with legal loopholes to have abortion as a religious ritual, a right. So in other words, if you want to practice this particular religion, you have freedom of religion in, say, Texas, where abortion is banned. Then to express your religion in the sacrament of the abortion, it was awful. Then you have that right. So they've tried to figure out legal loopholes using the freedom of religion to support a woman's right to reproductive freedom. So, okay. So then there's also they do work with the ACLU in a lot of ways, and they also work with an organization called Secular Student Alliance. I don't know of that organization, but it sounds like they are absolutely pro freedom of speech. One of their tenets, basically, it says the freedom of others should be respected, including the freedom to offend. To willfully and unjustly encroach upon the freedoms of another, including to offend, is to forego one's own freedom or right. That is fairly solid. There are some other tenets that they talk about, like one's body is inviolable, subject to one's own will alone. Okay, so that pertains to reproductive rights and all kinds of other rights. And then they take the first tenet is one should strive to act with compassion and empathy towards all creatures in accordance with reason. Okay, that's kind of loosey-goosey going on there.
That's humanism.
Yeah, that's humanism. But all creatures, does that mean being a vegan or not eating meat or something like that?
Or
So
not treating your child for head lice.
oof, yeah,
Which came up this week.
that's not good.
Yeah, it's a real borderline case. To the extent that it is a stunt, it can actually have some value and break through. To the extent that anybody takes it too seriously, I would say a bad argument is worse than none at all.
Yeah, to wrap this up, I'd like to just say, as opposed to to that kind of in the UK, so how they approach the LGBTQ community and the UK's viewpoint that psychological determinism is valid in those cases. That the Satanic Temple believes that it's actually more compassionate and more reasonable to allow for freedom of speech, including the right to offend. And it's harmful and abusive to punish speech, even if it is insulting. So that ties the first article with the last, or the third, I should say.
Absolutely. Now, do we have anything else to say about the Church of Satan? We may bounce back to that in a bit, but any more thoughts before I jump into our bonus topic? And let me ask our producer behind the scenes too, do we know if our Lord and Emperor, oh man, it should be our Lord and Savior if we're talking about starting a new temple, if Razi is going to be available to comment on this? Because I know, Alejandro, you were interested in this, and I think with good reason.
Indeed.
Just when you thought you might be able to count on one of the more reasonable voices, Douglas Murray, who responded reasonably, for example, to the autism girl story. He has a very good video out there defending her and criticizing the police. But he's just tweeted, except it's not tweeted now, he X'd, I guess you would say, he posted on the X platform that, quote, Europe cannot be the destination for anyone in the world who feels they, quote unquote, could not realize their dream in their country of origin. Let me read that again one more time. Douglas Murray says on X, on Twitter, Europe cannot be the destination for anyone in the world who feels that they could not realize their dream in their country of origin. Alejandro, what do you think of that? What's your reaction to that one?
It was painful and really sad to see him say such a thing, because in a sense, there's a really easy way for people not to come to a place like Europe, UK, America. And that has become a really bad country. And that's a really good way to stop immigration. And I was reminded of Atlas Shrugged. One of the big themes in the book is trying to see if people want to live. And as the book progresses, one of the things that you start to see is that the excuses that were given at the beginning, which had some pro-life, of sustainability, of pro-human kind of thinking, start to fade away and start to show the true face of the people. And some years ago, we started to hear that for people to live happily, we need to stop immigration, and that was just for all of us to live more happier lives. And especially in the UK, as Brexit has progressed, that excuse has changed towards, no, we need to stop immigration just because. But now the thing is, if you want to live a better life, if you want to improve your life, you should stop immigration altogether. Now, that really saddens me from Murray, because I used to think that I have a good opinion on some of his views. But this one was really, really sad, especially me, that I came to this country with really difficult circumstances. It was really difficult to come here. And I can imagine the lives of so many people who want to go better and see the UK and Europe as a beacon, like a place where you can live a much better life. And what you get is, no, this is your crime, and go away. That really feels really awful. And it's really sad to see that.
Yeah, the context for that tweet, and our producers put it up on the screen. He was responding to a quote from former refugee Mustafa Jarju, who had said, "I left my country, the Gambia, because I felt I could not realize my dream there." And explains why he crossed the Mediterranean to reach Europe in 2015 after it emerged that 41 immigrants died today on the same route. These are not people who are coming in as an army trying to take over the country. These are people who are risking their lives to find a better life.
Yeah, for this Douglas Murray character, for anybody to not understand or to see the value of a human being, of a thinking, reasoning human being who is going to risk their lives to get to another place so that they can be a part of the richness and creativity of the other people around them, is so, I know I'm kind of conceptually jumping here, but it's when a person doesn't realize the value of other people around them in general, it's a real red flag. And I think a lot of people do this because they say, well, you know, if it's Joe down the block, I'm sure he's of value to me in some way. I can go and borrow his lawnmower whenever I want to, whatever it is. But if it's this person from this one immigrant who actually risked his life to go to Europe or to a freer country, then I can't imagine what this guy is going to have to offer me, what value he's going to be to the other people around him. But you don't need to justify a person. Of course, you don't need to justify a person's existence by saying, well, what am I going to get from this guy? He should have, any human being should be able to go anywhere in the world as long as they are at least fairly rational and productive, and they deal with other people with a certain amount of reasonableness and of course eschew any kind of force or coercion. Yeah, so for this person, this Murray fellow, to not be able to see that this man, this individual, this human being is of value, and yeah, it's very disappointing and pretty bad, pretty wicked.
Sorry, Michael, were you?
I'm just thinking that whenever people say things like this, I just think it's intellectually incoherent. Like this Europe can't be a destination. Well, why not? Like I grew up in Wethersfield, Connecticut. Now I live in South Windsor, Connecticut. So what if South Windsor, Connecticut said South Windsor cannot be the destination for anyone who's not happy in their own town? Or what if Massachusetts said that about Connecticut? I mean, you can get to, well, if you're in this neighborhood or if you were born in this house, you can't go anywhere else. It just doesn't make any sense. Countries are ultimately, every country on this planet, as far as I know, was founded by conquest. These are arbitrarily set boundaries based on who conquered whom and when. They're not something that's intrinsic in reality, that this is Europe and this is Asia, and never the twain shall meet. And people say the same thing in regard to the southern border. Well, they're coming over here and they're taking our jobs, for instance, as if because these jobs are over here, they belong to us because we were born over here. Well, in California, that wasn't part of us until we made it part of us. So is it that's what this is all dependent on? What politicians and governments happen to decide our boundaries? That's what dictates what the rights of human beings are. And just to kind of make it a little bit more personal, this idea of not accepting people. I have this thing. There's a lot of people have been very accepting of me in my past and accept that I've transformed and are willing to give me a chance. Some people aren't. And I often think about these people who don't want to give ex-convicts, for instance, or immigrants a chance. And they say, no, just leave them in their hellhole countries. Do they think that if people are put in those situations, they're just going to say, okay, well, nobody wants to accept me. I think I'll just go live under a bridge. Nobody's going to do that. And you're just going to create a chaotic world, and it's not necessary, especially in the case of some poor people that are in another country that just want a better life. For God's sake. I mean, this is just dumb. I don't know what else to say about it. And
I think we should start to think about the real motives of this. I remember that a while ago, in the Elliot Page controversy, many people in the right said pride is a sin, and I think Douglas Murray was one of the people who also said that. And it's often the case that people like Murray are usually portrayed as the defenders of the Western world. But what is the Western world? I would say I would classify it as having three core values in its best: reason, discovery of reason, and pursuit of reason; purpose, like valuing purpose, productivity, and to some extent self-esteem, or the enjoyment of happiness. And one of the things that I've been seeing lately is that there's nobody defending that, and even the people who are supposedly the defenders of the West have no clue about that. It's really painful for me that whenever I ask someone in the UK, what are you proud of about your country? The thing that they say is the NHS, which is probably the most pathetic institution I've ever interacted with in my life. And I've really interacted with really pathetic institutions. It's really painful. It's not even, it doesn't even anger me. It's something really sad. The country of Tolkien, of Shakespeare, of all these achievements, of the birth of the Industrial Revolution. Nobody's speaking about that. And apparently also, it's also a sin that if you come here to better your life, it's also really bad as well.
Yeah, it's like in order to protect Western civilization, we're going to destroy its foundations. It reminds me of a quote I once heard when 9/11 happened and George W. Bush was saying, they hate us because of our freedom. And someone said, yes, they hate us because of our freedom. And that's why you're trying to make us unfree so they don't hate us anymore. And that's what this reminds me of. We have to protect Western civilization by giving up freedom, giving up rights, respect for other people. You're absolutely right, Alejandro.
Yeah, I understand Douglas Murray, which is all the more reason why I disagree with him profoundly on this. I know that he thinks he's trying to protect a certain level of civilization. He thinks that it's being corrupted by outside influences, and therefore it's a combination of the UK can't afford any more non-UK thinking, and at the same time, it's no longer what we in the US regard as ourselves as a shining city on the hill. It's no longer a destination. I think he's wrong on both counts. And I think his thinking, to the extent that it is accepted, is going to result in the exact opposite of what he wants. And I think we've made that point pretty clear. And as we come on the top of the hour, I've got a couple of special announcements. So let me throw this out there. Now, programming wise, we have had 5 days of the reality show, 5 days of the Daily Objective. We've had all the special shows, including the shows I do with James Valiant on Keeping It Real, HBTV, Lee Pearson Show, Cutting Edge. We're done with shows for the week, but we're not done, because this Saturday at 5 o'clock UK time, that's noon, that's lunchtime here on the East Coast, we are launching the ARCUK Philosophy Forum. Those of you who are into Clubhouse, you appreciated some of our after shows, a chance for you all to talk back and discuss. Well, this is going to be much better than that. We are launching the ARCUK Philosophy Forum, a place to discuss various topics from philosophy and politics and culture, and much more. The first session, now get this. This is going to require you to be at I think the platinum level or better. Certain amount of contribution that you make as a member of the ARCUK. This first session is going to be open to everybody. If you're an ARCUK member, even at whatever the base level is, you will be able to come to this first session. Check it out. See what you think of the new ARCUK Philosophy Forum. Again, that link is in the chat. It's also at the top of the chat, AynRandCenter.co.uk. Become a member, be a part of the ARCUK Philosophy Forum. Come talk to us. Let us know what's on your mind, how you analyze these issues. It's like you're part of the reality show. Saturdays, 5 p.m. UK time. And next week, we will do this all over again with all new topics, because there's a lot more to say. So thank you for joining us for the reality show. Michael, Alejandro, Amy, thank you for being on the panel today. Folks in the chat, watching, listening to the podcasts afterward, thank you for joining us. We're going to do it all over again on Monday. Thank you. And I think it's Alejandro who always says, or is it Michael? No, I'm stealing this from Nicholas. I'm going to start stealing this line. You good people, best premises to you all.